across the United States and within the global ICOMOS network. I think today I am the only person in the room with a tie on, so yeah. I should have worn my Hawaiian shirt from California. I also want to thank our sponsors and our supporters. The commitment to heritage education and public engagement ensures that we can convene conservation conversations like this that strengthen our collective capacity to protect and interpret places that matter. And I must say that the sponsors have been really super this year in making this happen. This year's theme, the shared heritage and shared future, reminds us that heritage is not only about the past. It's also about all of the choices that we make, choices that shape how future generations will understand their communities, their landscapes, and their histories. So over the next few days, we'll explore how heritage connects us across cultures, disciplines, and geographies. We'll examine how global frameworks like World Heritage Convention intersect with local realities and how communities are leading the way in reimagining stewardship, interpretation, and preservation. And I'd like to add a little bit that over the years, our interconnection of communications has been absolutely fantastic, especially amongst our younger folks. They keep in touch with everything. I used to be sort of a little Debbie Downer when I would kind of walk into it and see them all on their little iPhones and everything else, and you know, they're actually text messaging one another when they're at a dinner table. And I thought, but this is the way they talk. And we need to really jump on that, and you'll find out a little bit about that today. I still didn't like it when my granddaughter-in-law basically got her first iPhone when she was only 8 years old. And yeah. So our program brings together scholars, practitioners, tribal representatives, community leaders, and advocates working on the front lines of heritage conservation. You'll hear about innovative projects, new research, and collaborative approaches that reflect the diversity and complexity of heritage in the United States. And you also, we're going to ask you to engage in a lot of these pressing issues like climate impacts, underrepresentation, development pressures, and the need for more inclusive narratives. But just as important as the sessions themselves, you have the opportunity to connect with one another. For instance, I see Lisa over there, and I see Ray over there. And they're giving a lecture tomorrow, along with me, or a presentation, I should say, and yet you guys aren't sitting together, okay? So it's inherited collaborative, heritage is. And the relationships formed here across the disciplines, institutions, and communities help strengthen our shared mission and expand our collective impact. So again, thank you so much for being here. I was very honored to be elected president for this year. We've really come a long ways in the last few months in terms of getting together with some programs that were sort of lost at sea. And we brought them into safe harbors and treated the ships up, and now they're on their way again. So that's a Ray Ashley metaphor, by the way. So anyway, we're really looking forward to all the conversations we could have. And please, if you see somebody you don't know, come up, introduce yourself, shake your hands. Okay? Tiffany, where are you? I lost my... Come on up here. By the way, Ira Matt, who is the executive director of the Indigenous Diplomacy and Federal Relations and National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers that I've known for some time, was going to be on our panel. Well, come on.
I don't want to take your spotlight.
No, spotlights are big. Okay. So Ira could not make it here. Family comes first. Some of our staff members couldn't happen. So he is very, very busy taking care of people. Ira is a Sulus and the citizens of the Confederation Sulus and Kootenai tribes. He serves as the Executive Director for the Indigenous Diplomacy and Federal Relationships at the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. And Ira has more than 25 years of experience in tribal sovereignty, cultural heritage protection, tribal consultation, indigenous knowledge, and federal tribal relationships. I first met Ira probably over 20 years ago when I was chairman of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. He was on the staff and then basically took over the director of tribal and indigenous peoples at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. So he can't be here. However, we do have Tiffany. Yay. I'm sure that many of you know Tiffany. She is the Senior Director for Preservation, African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And she is the Senior Director for Preservation at the African American Cultural Heritage Fund, and she leads the high-profile preservation programs and projects like the Historic Black College University Cultural Heritage Stewardship Initiative and Preserving Black Churches, and develops preservation strategies for national significant sites associated with African American cultural heritage, such as the Nina Sonomi Childhood Home, the John and Alice Coltrane Home, the Robert Smalls House, and the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument. She previously served as director of the Northwest Field Office at Indiana Landmarks from 2006 and 2017. And I think I actually met you when I was in Indianapolis. She's a native of Montgomery, Alabama, and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Huntington College in Montgomery, and a political science and history, and Master in Historic Preservation from Georgia State University. You want me to keep going on?
No, you can stop.
All right. She's published several books as reflections and traces and stuff for the Georgia Historic Preservation Division of the Indiana Historical Society as well. So she's extremely active, and we are so happy, and especially her work on women in the civil rights movement. So we're really happy to have her here, and she's going to start off with her presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Do I advance from up here? Oh, gotcha. Thank you. Well, first I want to thank ICOMOS and World Heritage for the invitation to address you all this afternoon. Also want to acknowledge our co-panelist who wasn't able to be here, so want to keep him and his family in our thoughts and prayers. I'm also happy to represent the National Trust as a sponsor of this year's conference. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay through the rest of the week and join you all for the rest of the conference, but I'm really excited that my colleagues are here. They raised their hands here at the National Trust. Milan, Nikita, Brandon, Catherine, and Rhonda, so I hope you'll be able to interact with them and learn about all the wonderful work we're doing across the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I'll make one correction to my intro. As of maybe 2.5 weeks ago, my title has changed, so I am now co-director of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund and vice president at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So the work has not changed, but just didn't want any confusion. But in keeping with the theme of our session, intangible heritage as an embedded dimension of place, I want to talk and start by saying when we think about preservation, our attention often goes first to the tangible aspects of a historic site or place. We look at the architecture, the materials, and the physical condition of a site to determine the best preservation treatments. Those are all essential parts of the work. But as we think about how preservation is practiced at sites connected to communities of color and cultural heritage, it's equally important to consider what isn't always visible. The stories, traditions, memories, and cultural practices associated with the place, what we refer to as intangible cultural heritage, are just as critical to understanding its significance. As I mentioned in this introduction, today I want to focus on how intangible cultural heritage is defined, and more importantly, how it is being integrated into preservation practice in the United States and subsequently around the world. To bring this to life, I'd like to briefly highlight the work of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund and our stewardship framework. This work demonstrates how intangible cultural heritage can shape not only the technical side of preservation, but also how we engage communities, build long-term financial sustainability, and develop more meaningful approaches to interpretation. It offers a model for thinking about preservation as not just caring for historic places, but also stewarding the living histories and cultural traditions that give those places their meaning. First, I'll start by just describing the Innovative Stewardship Framework. The Innovative Stewardship Framework organizes preservation planning around three interconnected pillars: preservation, culture, and management. This holistic approach recognizes that long-term site stewardship requires more than the protection of historic and cultural resources. By establishing best practices within each pillar and evaluating how they influence one another, the framework promotes an integrated strategy that strengthens preservation outcomes, supports cultural significance, and ensures sustainable management. The result is a comprehensive model for stewardship that advances the long-term viability, relevance, and impact of historic sites. The preservation pillar establishes a comprehensive understanding of a building or site through the documentation and evaluation of its historic significance, intangible heritage, integrity, and existing physical conditions. Specifically, this pillar ensures African American historic sites are recognized as more than physical structures, but repositories of memory, tradition, and lived experience, and will remain living spaces of memory, identity, and culture. This assessment serves as the foundation for determining an appropriate treatment approach, whether preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, or a combination thereof. This aligns with the site's intended program, use, and stewardship goals. By grounding decision-making in a thorough understanding of the resource, the preservation pillar ensures that future interventions protect and enhance the site's historic character while supporting its long-term viability. The culture pillar focuses on shaping how a site's stories, meanings, and values are interpreted, shared, and experienced. Through the development of interpretation and programming plans, supported by intentional engagement with communities, descendants, and other stakeholders, this pillar ensures that diverse perspectives inform the site's future. Working in concert with the selected preservation treatment, the culture pillar helps determine how the site can be physically activated as a center for cultural engagement, learning, and public access, fostering meaningful connections between the place, its history, and contemporary audiences. The management pillar evaluates the long-term feasibility and sustainability of a site by establishing a strategic roadmap for its operations and stewardship. Through the development of operational and financial models, this pillar assesses the implications of rehabilitation costs, ongoing maintenance requirements, staffing capacity, and programmatic needs. These models provide the foundation for informed decision-making that guides budget development, financial management, and resource allocation. They also serve as critical tools for shaping fundraising strategies and identifying the investments necessary to support the site's long-term preservation, activation, and sustainability. Using the stewardship framework, the pillars of preservation and culture offer the best opportunity to identify and define the intangible heritage of a site. However, the specific planning objectives prioritized within each pillar vary according to the unique context, opportunities, and challenges of each site. As we continue, I'm going to highlight three of our signature projects: the Robert Smalls House, the Nina Simone Childhood Home, and Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ, where the stewardship framework is currently being applied, and how they're at the Tryon Theater at the age of 6. Mrs. Muriel Mazanovich, a local piano teacher, convinced her mother that given her extraordinary talent, she should pursue lessons. Mazanovich began teaching Simone at her house in Tryon and organized the Eunice Wayman Fund to raise money for her continued education through high school. In 2016, this 3-room clapboard house where she spent her childhood and began to learn to play the piano was in severe disrepair and put up for sale. With the threat of its impending demolition, 4 African-American artists came forward to purchase the home and partner with the Action Fund to develop a stewardship strategy for the site. Starting with the preservation pillar, the treatment strategy focused on repair and restoration. However, this was not with the intent of creating a house museum, but with the goal that the Nina Simone Childhood Home will serve as a powerful national and global catalyst for truth-telling, pride, and possibility by amplifying her legacy and restoring her spirit to the roots of her artistry and activism. The Nina Simone Childhood Home is an example of how intangible heritage can be used to inform not only preservation practice, but interpretation and programming. Specifically, when there are very few photos of archival materials available to provide an understanding of the lives of those connected to the site. Sorry, I did this the wrong one. The historic photo we see here is the only historic image we have showing the home near the time of the Wayman family's occupation. We were able to use this photo to understand changes to the building over time, materials, and character-defining features that were no longer visible. This includes the metal shingled roof, windows, siding, the brick pier foundation, and chimney. However, the photo does not give us insight into how the Wayman family occupied the home, grounds, and neighborhood. It does not show us the culture of the neighborhood or the African-American community in Tryon. So in this case, the documentation of intangible heritage in conjunction with technical preservation practice is guiding the development of the interpretive framework for the site and the broader East Side neighborhood. The documentation was sourced through oral history from family members and neighbors. Archaeological investigation informed the understanding of how the Wayman family used the site. Looking at the rendering, you will see the swept yard, visible in the historic photo, is reintroduced to reflect a common feature of early 20th century African-American homes. Areas where the family garden, as well as privies, were identified are now outlined for visitors as well. Oral history interviews with the brother of Nina Simone answered the question of the large amount of gin bottles found during the archaeological investigation, as it was popularly used both for medicinal and recreational use by the family and broader community. Interior finishes were repaired and restored, as you can see here. However, for materials that were beyond repair, care was taken to save portions and leave them visible to support understanding of original paint colors, wood materials, and linoleum finishes. The Robert Smalls House was built in 1834 in the Point neighborhood in Beaufort, South Carolina. Robert Smalls was born enslaved in a cabin on the site in 1839. Robert Smalls' story spans from slavery to Reconstruction to Jim Crow to today. At the age of 23, Smalls seized his freedom from enslavement at the height of the Civil War by commandeering a Confederate steamship. He liberated himself as well as 6 comrades and their families and delivered a valuable ship and weaponry to the Union Army. His bravery earned him a cash reward, a Navy commission, and fame that launched a long, storied career. After the war, he chose to go back to Beaufort with his family, where he became a successful businessman, a 5-term Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and one of the staunchest defenders of political and educational rights in the country. Designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1973, the home was occupied by members of the Smalls family for more than 90 years. In 2023, the National Trust, through the Action Fund, acquired the Robert Smalls House in support of a goal of increased public access and interpretation. With the engagement of the National Trust, local resistance emerged in response to the possibility of increased public access, leading to several lawsuits being filed. Following acquisition of the Smalls House and subsequent legal resolution, the stewardship framework is now being applied, however, within the parameters of a settlement agreement reached with Historic Beaufort Foundation, who is the easement holder. The agreement confirms that the house shall only be used as a residence, as stated in the preservation easement. However, it further clarifies that the easement does allow for controlled and managed tours of the property during limited days and times of the week, and provides an expanded definition of residential use. Given the parameters, the stewardship framework is prioritizing the development of interpretation and program plan, which speaks to public access through guided tours, limited programming, and artist and scholar residency. and an operational management plan, which will set the strategy for stewarding and managing the site for public benefit. During the legal proceedings, I recall a statement in the local community that there was nothing for the public to learn about Robert Smalls by having access to the interior of the house. Due to subsequent interior renovations, the assertion was any historic fabric and integrity was not visible or removed, leaving the house no longer reflect the period of significance related to Robert Smalls. There were also attempts to diminish the significance of Robert Smalls and the contributions of his family. Through the stewardship framework at Robert Smalls, we see how the preservation pillars dispelling assertions such as these. Through mortar and paint analysis initiated by the process, plentiful paint layers were found within the interior at doors, wainscoting, and mantels, confirming that these elements likely date to at least the later period of significance, 1870 to 1915, established by a historic structures report we completed in 2022. Additionally, there is enough variation in paint colors above one mantel to suggest something more decorative was painted there at some point in time. As we look at interpretation through the culture pillar, documentation and analysis such as this provides the opportunity to not only restore key features of the home, but also educate the public on the contribution of Robert Smalls and the Smalls family on the design and expansion of the house, his influence on the architectural legacy of Beaufort, and the lives of African Americans during the Reconstruction era. This is also supported by direct engagement with Smalls' descendants, whose oral history provides understanding of the family's social practices, traditions, and how the home adapted over time in response to this culture. Lastly, we can take what we have learned from the Smalls House site to broaden the understanding of the lives of African Americans during Reconstruction in Beaufort. Recent research by the National Park Service is now documenting other properties in the neighborhood which were acquired by African Americans after the Civil War in the same fashion as Robert Smalls. This ensures that the full story of Reconstruction is told and is countering prevailing narratives on the history of the neighborhood and its association or lack of with African American life. Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ was founded in 1916 in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago by Bishop William Roberts. Its construction started in 1923 and would subsequently play a large role in the support of African Americans during the Great Migration. The church is most noted for being the site of Emmett Till's extended visitation and funeral following his murder in Mississippi in August of 1955. This is the site where his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, made the courageous decision to allow a public viewing of his body in order to, quote, let the world see. Robert's Temple is a designated Chicago landmark and in 2023 was included in the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument, along with 2 sites in Mississippi. Robert's Temple serves as an example of how oral histories and community participation can highlight tangible heritage and reclaim integrity and significance for historic sites. Despite its well-documented cultural significance, Robert's Temple was not listed on the National Register of Historic Places, due to subsequent renovations resulting in the property not appearing as it did in 1955. This includes, as you can see here, recladding of the facade and renovation of the sanctuary, spaces that were utilized and highly photographed during the funeral and visitation in 1955. As part of the National Monument designation process, we were asked to develop a national statement of significance, which was accepted by the keeper of the National Register. The statement solidified Robert's Temple's significance both architecturally but also culturally. One of the quotes from the Statement of Significance says, "The funeral provided an opportunity for Black Chicagoans, both young and old, to come and grieve in person and to express that grief. Because of this, the visitation and funeral at Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ served as a transcendent moment in Emmett Till's story. In contrast with other sites of significance associated with the Emmett Till legacy, Robert's Temple's role as a house of worship for the Black community allowed collective mourning without de facto or de jure racial segregation. Its denomination, Black Pentecostalism, as well as its location in historically Black community, imparted a level of Black agency over the messages delivered by speakers at the funeral. The decision to send Emmett's body to Chicago and to hold the extended visitation and funeral with the casket open were made by Black Americans. Robert's Temple was and remains a Black space in a Black community. Robert's Temple is where Emmett Till's story intersected with America. While Americans were familiar with the horrors of racial violence, it was at Roberts Temple where those horrors were made visible. With use of the preservation pillar, the intangible heritage found in areas of understanding, such as the house of worship, Black community, and its tradition of collective mourning, the Black Pentecostalism traditions, and the cultural tradition of Black spaces and communities inform the restoration approach for both the facade and the sanctuary. This includes ensuring character-defining features which reflect renovations, additions, decisions made by Black Americans remain visible. In the culture pillar, similar to Nina Simone and Robert Smalls, we're leaning heavily on community engagement to not only inform preservation treatment, but also provide greater resolution around the project vision, the visitor journey through the building, and comprehensive list of desired spaces and interpretive priorities, as we want to understand and balance the needs of the user groups for the church and the National Monument. So we convened a select group of participants chosen from their longstanding ties to Roberts Temple, a group referred to as the 1955 Community of Memory. We began by inviting personal reflections on the significance of the church and sharing core memories of the Emmett Till funeral. You can see some of the reflections here, which capture memories of spaces, the funeral, and the desire to reclaim the feel of the space as a house of worship. As we finalize this community engagement process, it offered an opportunity to present participants with a culmination of their input and engagement through the development of key interpretive themes and how these themes will be expressed both within the physical space of Roberts Temple and throughout the visitor experience. For the theme, Church of God in Christ, the Great Migration and Spiritual Traditions, we identified a range of tangible resources, such as films and recorded services that can be integrated into interpretive design and exhibition space. These elements create meaningful opportunities for visitors to see the lived traditions of the church. As noted earlier, central goal is for visitors to feel a connection to the church and its community. This theme supports that aim by fostering an emotional experience in which visitors can also feel the connection. And sustaining opportunities for visitors to learn about Emmett Till, the theme Emmett Till Funeral, National Visibility, Black Agency, and Mamie Till Mobley's leadership present the strongest potential for visual and spatial impact. The sanctuary itself, through its preservation and restoration, serves as the primary tangible asset grounding the story in place, but situating the history within Roberts Temple and emphasizing its role during this pivotal moment in 1955, the experience is designed to ensure visitors not only see the history, but also feel a sense of care, reflection, and communal support, echoing the role the church played for Mamie Till Mobley and the broader community. And that is the intangible culture the process has rediscovered. As you look at the images here, I want to bring you back to the topic of this session on how intangible cultural heritage is defined and how it is being integrated into preservation practice in the United States. Intangible heritage takes us beyond the need to look at historic sites from a voyeuristic position, or simply as a place where George Washington or Dr. Martin Luther King slept. Documentation of intangible heritage allows us the opportunity to elevate the context, community, and cultural traditions into our understanding of how they influence not only iconic lives such as these, but our lives as well. The story of Nina Simone's upbringing is the story of millions of African-American girls born and raised in the South in the early 20th century. The story of Robert Smalls is the story of many of us, some who sit here today, whose elders rose from enslavement to establishing a legacy of ownership and agency for future generations of their family. That includes myself, as I stand here speaking to you today, though that story took place in Montgomery, Alabama. The story of Roberts Temple is the experience of African Americans and the role of the Black church in providing a sense of community, refuge, support, and celebration. It remains a consistent place of grounding as the struggle for equality and social justice continues. Leaning into documentation of intangible heritage, community engagement, and preservation practice is ensuring the sites associated with these lives remain as sites of education, inspiration, and truth-telling for many generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I'm going to backfill a little bit behind Ira today. It won't be exactly what he was going to give. But I think it's important as we go through this is to kind of look at the history that we've been through in a lot of this stuff. And by the way, I really apologize. I forgot to introduce staff. Most of you met them as you went into the room and registered. But Ariana, Kelsey, April, Maddie, and Michelle and Gilbert, excuse me, and Diana and Janice are all here. I'd like to stand up for 5 seconds and then sit down. All right, how do we do this? What do we press? Oh, did it. Now what do we do? Oh, there you go, okay. And clicker. All right, very good. All right, so to whom does the cultural heritage belong? That's not my title. This was a title of an international symposium following the demolition of Frank Lloyd Wright's Imperial Hotel in 1967, which was first built in 1923 and survived one of the great earthquakes that devastated Tokyo because of Wright's design. It's interesting, in 1992, Japan accepted the World Heritage Convention concerning the protection of world cultural and national heritage. And not to get too much into the detail, but it was thought that Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture is not their cultural identity in Japan, which I found very interesting. The National Historic Preservation Act and the program, of course, in terms of building a more inclusive program, is starting to go much further than when I first started in this business almost 50 years ago. Besides going beyond the individual buildings that you heard Tiffany speak about, and historic sidelights, and as I call the good old white man's history, is that I think it's important that everything that's worth preserving from our past as a living part of the present, that we should sort of focus on. And the social benefits of heritage are really great anymore. I know that sometimes heritage has gone to some communities, like when we get World Heritage sites, and now they're sort of pushing back that they don't want it anymore because of the cruise lines and the other tours and everything else are basically trampling these places to death, or they're stealing stuff and things like this. But it won't make any difference if they're removed from the World Heritage List or not, because I can't imagine places like Pompeii, for instance, being removed from the World Heritage List, and nobody's going to go there. So we need to figure out how we're going to basically not only protect these, but what are some of the heritage indicators to help capture the contributions to the sustainable development that we have. I think most important thing is that like these exemplar projects that we're having, like Tiffany does, is we really need to share those to look at how we can look at the social, economic, and regenerative values. So, like in 1963, the construction of Interstate 5 in San Diego bisected San Diego's largest Mexican-American neighborhood, known as Barrio Logo. And then in 1969, the Coronado Bay Bridge was opened, further devastating the neighborhood. As a result, it was basically then named Chicano Park, and decided then to paint these wonderful 49 brightly painted murals, which was also, by at that time, works of masters of the Chicano movement, muralism. And when it was even younger than 50 years of age, it also became listed in the National Register of Historic Places as a site of exceptional significance. So I've got, I think, 4 or 5 ideas. One is representation. One of the things that I don't think we do enough when we're really studying this, and Tiffany hinted to it, is contextual difficulties. In other words, how do we pull all of this, how do we pull this together to look at all the integrated reviews that we have? There's also a problem that we're currently having in how to resolve patterns of disengagement. In other words, people that we wish to have help us with these just do not want to engage for a variety of different reasons. So the National Trust Diversity Scholarship Program for emerging professionals is not that old. It only began in 1992, but it made it possible then for community leaders to attend the National Preservation Conference, and it's also, I think, really nice that now several offices throughout the U.S., like for instance the California State Historic Preservation Office, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation now are taking in interns as emerging professionals. And I really recommend, if you are in an academic climate, that you should really promote this. I was fortunate when I was appointed by Obama to be the chairman of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, is that he started the federally recognized White House Tribal Nations Conference, which was really, really super. California, as you may or may not know, has 109 federally recognized tribes and 44 non-recognized tribes that we also recognize in California. So we're looking at almost 1/4 of all of the recognized tribes in the United States. But he started this conference, and it was really good when they're talking about shared values. We also promoted looking at Angel Island, which is the Ellis Island of the West in 1910. Most of you have probably, well, I know all of you know the place, and I hope most of you have been there then. But it was the main immigration facility on the West Coast from 1910 to 1940. Mostly from China and other Asian countries were there, especially for extended periods thanks to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which barred Chinese laborers from coming to the United States. It was unfortunate that once arrival in San Francisco, a ship's passenger would be separated by nationality. And all of the Europeans and first-class passengers would have their paper processed aboard ship and be able to disembark, where it took several days for other persons to basically be let into California. We also have other areas that are really important in most of our areas, like, excuse me, for instance, the Hindu faith, which is again the 3rd largest religion. We now have Stockton, which has now developed the Cultural and Community Center in there, and I think it's really unique because we were invited to participate in a very long ceremony and stuff, especially when you consider that the origin goes back to 4000 to 2200 BC. So one of the things that was interesting in terms of these intangible heritage is that when you went in, you removed your footwear, and the entrance to any temple in India is picket fenced by shoe racks. You put your camera away, you cover up, you avoid leather, cleanliness and godliness, make an offering, walk clockwise, and greet the gods. So anytime that you go in there then, if you're going to feel a cultural change, you really feel it at places like this. We also have the LGBTQ sites, many of them on the National Historic Landmarks or in the National Register of Historic Preservation with a list of over 2,500. I think it's interesting to note that most of our museums now are really trying to focus on presenting lectures and everything else, including California was fortunate to receive a major grant and survey from the National Trust for Historic Preservation of 3 main areas that we have. So ideal 2 is engaging professional experts and communities. Oftentimes, experts are including myself, get focused in certain areas that they know best, and they really don't go beyond their usual elitist circles. And I think that still exists. We have to use more accessible language. I think Mark Twain once said, "I'll never send my reader to the dictionary." And there's a lot of good truth in that. Delete unnecessary documentation. I made a big push when I was the State Historic Preservation Office to do this. You don't have to start, if you're talking about, for instance, areas in California, you don't have to start with the founding of the missions. Really, you don't, if it has nothing to do with the discovery of gold, for instance. Also, make it available. I think anybody that's in any program, including even professional programs or even in private industry that have their shops, should make this documentation available. I know in the early days, everybody says, "Oh, I'm going to hide this because it gives me an up to when I go in for an interview that I've got all this great stuff." So, but we want to get this great stuff out there. Promote heritage education in school. Most of the colleges now have a preservation program. I know when I started, I think maybe just one in New York was there, and that was about it. But most of them have something like this. And then also to value the community. Without using also all of our communication channels to message, we tend to get lost. So really, except I did, except texting, blogs, chat rooms, Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, whatever you think is your best connection in that. Because I think eventually emailing is going to be out of date. I see you gals down there laughing. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Okay. And then one of my greatest experiences I had is when historic Filipino town got Preserve America community status, which was just really, really wonderful. They have tried for so many years, and I guess coming from California, I really pushed for it. But one thing I noticed, which was really unique, is that when Michelle Obama signed that certificate, which was her original signature, we had fourth graders and small kids come up and touch that signature. I mean, that was a moment. So, engaging the next generation in historic preservation, the Santa Barbara Presidio Archaeology has been working together for many, many years in order to teach children not only how finding jobs and stuff and training. So what they do is they bury, I don't know, facsimile artifacts in the dirt and then let the kids go at it. And of course, they found out really quickly that you don't use all the archaeology tools because they'll kill one another. So we give them little gardening spades and stuff like that. And then when they find it, they have to identify it with the help of the archaeologists. And then what does that mean to the history? And I remember that there was one gal that was actually a descendant from some of the earlier folks that built the Presidio there and had no idea about that until she started tracing it back. So I think it really helps. And there's a really great program that I got involved in because I just love to do scuba diving, is Youth Diving with a Purpose program. And we modeled that after what was happening in Florida. Not a porpoise, but a purpose. Okay. Let's say ideal 3, criteria and integrity. We still have to work on the National Register of Historic Places. I think it's great, but I know when Stephanie, I think, came out to California, is that only about 3% were representing underserved communities at that. We also need to promote tribal registers. Whether or not they share it with you is up to them, but we really need to promote this because they know their history better than we do. Also encourage listing properties associated with the living. This is one thing I've been fighting ever since. Well, you know, has his practice been over? Has he just shown everything? Is he going to maybe 2 years, do something horrible, and then he's going to be on the National Register. Well, who cares? I think the greatest thing is celebrating stuff when you're alive, not having people celebrate stuff on you when you're dead. I shouldn't say that. That's too much. All right. The dynamic evolution of space. I think Tiffany gave a really a good feedback on this. It is an evolution. I know when I was in New Jersey, I can't remember exactly where, this one church had changed hands 3 times, beginning with the Catholic Church. It was now a temple. So I think they didn't tear the building down or anything else. They just reused it. We really need to think the 7 definitions of integrity. Most places in Europe use the word authenticity, and it's dealt in with the World Heritage Site nominations as well. And I think it's really important that we sort of look at this. I mean, the integrity is important. There's no question about it. But it basically sounds more like an architect wrote it. Location, design, setting, materials, workmanship. Oh, wait, feeling. Well, what the heck does that mean? It just feels right? And association. Those are not really described very much in integrity. We seem to get hung up on materials. All right, so we really need to take a look at that. And then lastly, I think is reconsider consideration G. And the reason is there's so much things, yes, we're going to discover stuff later on. It's mostly an archaeological focus, but we've also been nominating now sites to the National Register, not based upon necessary just consideration G, but we've also are nominating for its own value in that. So I think it's really important that, it's called the National Register of Historic Places, not historic buildings or historic things. And we're going to go through this really quickly now because we got another session coming up. The Yuma Crossing National Heritage Area, we're now working on that to expand that and try to understand it. It's been going on for 1 million years right now. If you have not had a chance to do there, I think it's really important. Southern Pacific Railroad, that was one of its major crossing, as well as the boats coming up. And Ray's going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow in terms of how the boats come up there, and part of that cultural trade is there. Fort Yuma. Oops, what did I do here? Yeah, Fort Yuma, originally called Camp Cahoon. First it was a military fort. Now, of course, it belongs to the Clashan, and became a boarding school, unfortunately, by the Catholic Church in 1900. But it was transferred way back in 1884 by the Department of Interior to the tribe. And of course, they have made it really good, and we've worked on a lot of projects. The other thing we should try to think about, which really ties all of this together, including our intangible heritage, are national trails, in terms of for instance, at the Vallecito Stage Station out in the Anza Borrego Desert, the Butterfield Overland stage line went through there. It used to be part of the early mail delivery as well. But I think it's interesting to note that this has been going on now and has been restored by the rangers themselves. It seems as though, just like a lot of people that are that are with a lot of the groups, the younger kids now that are basically working for any of these, like the county rangers, for instance, are now taking this on as part of, they kind of own ownership of it. And instead of just watching it fall apart, I took a week long teaching them how to repair Adobe out there. And now they do this every 6 months. They go out there, they check it out, and they repair it. So now we're not worrying for the county to have to raise money in order to do these projects. They've really taken ownership of this. They also did a wonderful thing, which was when the U.S. government carried the first mail from San Antonio to San Diego. They had to take it over the mountains using mules and everything else, which they did. It used to be called the Jackass Mail. And they actually thought, well, why don't we do this as well? And of course, more of the modern architecture. Taliesin West is one of the 6 sites of Frank Lloyd Wright, also as a National Historic Landmark as well. And now they've kind of restarted their educational program, which is really good. And this is one of my favorites, Bubblegum Alley, San Luis Obispo. I went to school there in the architectural department. And as a student, that was a must. You have to go out there, chew your bubble gum, stick it on the wall, okay? So anyway, these were unreinforced masonry buildings, so they're about ready to tear it down, so I said, no, let's not do that. So we nominated it to the National Register of Historic Places at a local significance. The owners weren't happy, but boy, did you talk about tourism. Everybody wanted to come here because, like my wife, Lori, they just stand there and laugh at it. And you'll find interesting things buried in the bubble gum, including, I hate to say it, a tooth. So, yeah, I know. Let's move on. All right. Economics and law. I'm not going to get too much into this, especially about the impacts and the preservation tax credits. Everybody's fighting these. It's really too bad because we're seeing a lot of laws passed. Proposition 2007 was passed in Arizona, and it had a chilling effect in the local designation of historic districts as zoning overlays because it allowed property owners the right to seek compensation if they believe local zoning changes have lowered their property values. And we know from all the studies that have been out there that does not happen, but it basically put a virtual stop to the local designation of historic districts. All right. The other thing is codes. This 4-year-old is joyriding in California Alligator Farm. Yes, that's what she actually did. I hope the belt around the alligator's mouth is strong. I don't know whether they test it. Of course, I'm sure the Society of Preservation of Cruelty to Animals would have something to say about this now. But it's managing risk. It's also looking at some of our buildings that we have. Like when I went to school, I was a window monitor, which means we didn't have any HVAC or heating, venting, and air conditioning. No such thing came in. So when it got a little bit hot, you opened the windows on one side that were high and opened the windows that were lower, and the wind blew through. And of course, we had chalk monitors and everything else. And I know we're not doing chalkboards anymore. But still, I think it's important to note that a lot of these pre-war buildings and stuff, they still work. And we need to take a look at that. I belong to Leadership in Environmental and Energy Design, and anybody can fall over backwards to get a silver rating. When Governor Schwarzenegger was governor, he said that every building that undergoes rehabilitation, no matter what its age is, has to meet at least a silver standard in that. And of course, now we got them even better. The Miwok Ceremonial Roundhouse at Yosemite was fought to death, I have to say, by the National Park Service. For many years, I tried to help them out as much as I can. We finally got it cleared. I think it's important to note that they wanted to build it just the way they used to build it because this was part of their training for all of their younger members of the tribe. So anyway, we finally came up with a stupid rule, but they were able to rebuild it. And again, nothing to do with earthquake analysis, nothing like that. You just build it because guess what? They've been building this for thousands of years, and it hasn't fallen down. Wow. The only thing is the National Park Service does not allow the public to go in there, only members of the tribe, if they so desire. So the last one, of course, that we've talked about is intangible heritage. We're going to hear a lot about this, so I'm not going to really get too much into this, but other countries and the way they do it, especially since we're dealing with World Heritage Sites, is look at the national treasure concept. These people are alive when they're doing this. In fact, we lost a very unique architect because he was captured by Japan right after he did the Dulles Station and was taught back, and they provided him then enough of the project so he could do it over there rather than coming over here. I think storytelling is extremely important. Let me see here. But we have to understand is let them tell their own story. All right, so I'm going to go through here very quickly. Fort Apache reunion, and then, of course, the great Buffalo soldiers. They started their own motorcycle club, which is really cool, and you should see their bikes. You'd swear, I don't know what they got on it, but they got some really great stuff on there. And then, of course, the other thing about some of the intangible heritage, like the Klamath River, this was real important. They had a fish kill many, many years ago, and the USDA declared that the Yurok Nation is a food desert. And the salmon is much more than just food to them. It's not only did it produce a dramatic change in the diet amongst the tribal members after the dams were built, but it resulted in 85% of the households having at least one person who suffers from high blood pressure, diabetes, cavities, or obesity after that happened. Now that's an intangible heritage that you don't want, all right? So food sovereignty became an important thing. So what did they do? They basically really altered a lot of the dams and everything else and put in the fish ladders that you normally see, which most people do for the salmon, and now basically they're growing. But with no salmon, the Yurok tribe struggled with identity for years. I'm going to just go past the two sisters. This was to make sure that after the 13th Amendment, that any of the enslaved individuals had their freedom and try to find out their lost families, especially amongst African Americans and all of that. And of course, we know what today's environment is producing with a lot of people at the border with the separation of children and their parents. Or we somehow have to talk about those things that people have not wanted to talk about, that we're trying to get back engaged. These are little girls at the Indian Phoenix School, 1900, beside their beds, and Christianity was a major part of the curriculum, and the Indian religions were strictly forbidden. Now, since California has about 34, I think, tribes that are associated with the missions, every time we have a meeting, we try to invite a tribal member to come in and give an opening prayer to the ceremony, and they usually do, and they give it in their own native language, and then afterwards they start off with Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So they're practicing both of the religions that they have on that. The government school in Pine Ridge Agency, South Dakota, their families, their children were basically put in boarding schools, so the families came out and camped on them. And we had about 8,000 students on reservations that were in this thing at the side. So I'm going to end up with one here, project I worked on, the Americanization School in Oceanside, very famous Irving Gill architect that we have, basically built in 1936. It's now called the Crown Heights Resource Center. But it was one of these dark portions in our history that we need to talk about. And it was because, let's see what I've got up there now. So this is the school. This is where the school basically took Spanish-speaking residents and taught them English and civics, but they did more than that. They cut their hair. They couldn't come with their hairstyles, including the boys. They couldn't wear their clothes. They couldn't speak their language. And to me, language is probably the most important to keeping your culture. You lose your language, you lose your culture. So anyway, this had three big I don't know, for lack of better words, gangs in the hood. And they used to get in fights all the time, tag each other's building, and stuff like that. The city basically provided the materials. I used my contractor's license, and we hired people from the hood. And they all came together. The only criteria, you can't wear your colors, but they came together, and they all worked together, and now it's all one. Nothing's been tagged. Everything's disappeared. We had a wonderful opening ceremony. And, you know, it's all about the children, folks. That's what we want to focus on. So I'm going to stop there because we're going to go ahead and I'm not going to show you my last slide, but we'll stop there because we have a workshop coming up I did want to say, before I invite Diana to come up, is I'd like to call Cindy up. She wants to mention a real special tour of Independence Hall tomorrow and how you can become a part of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. That was fascinating. I'm Cindy McLeod, retired superintendent of Independence National Historical Park. So on behalf of Philadelphia, welcome to the city of brotherly love and sisterly accomplishment. Today, July 8th, is the 250th anniversary of the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. Did any of you go over there to see it? They didn't call it No King's Day, but I do today. And the superintendent said, "Don't you all want to see Independence Hall?" The current superintendent. I said, "Well, you've been so busy the last few days, weeks. I really didn't want to bother you." He said, "No." So that is super kind. And he said, if we can get there by 5:15 tomorrow, so we need to, wrap it up. I'm one of the panelists, so I'll try to be brief or on time. We can have a tour of Independence Hall. The tickets are really hard to come by these days. So how many of you would be interested in going? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, I think that's everybody. I was thinking about limiting it to 30, but let Ariana know. She's in the back. So you saw that. It looks like pretty much everybody wants to go. But they'll have a special ranger, I hope, to talk to us. So good, and we'll make that announcement tomorrow morning, and I may see if I can up the number a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, Diana, do you want to come up and introduce your Monuments Toolkit workshop? You folks that signed up for it?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Diana Hernandez. I'm the program director for the Monuments Toolkit project at World Heritage USA, ICOMOS-USA. So with me today are two of my teammates, Noah Price, who is passing out our handout, and Gilberto Correa, who is our community engagement and director of binational nominations. And sorry, Noah is our media and marketing associate. So the three of us are going to be tag teaming this session, so you'll hear from all of us. And before we get into it,